Welcome to today's data specification workshop this morning. So I'm Amelia, I'll be facilitating today's event, and we'll be joined by Neil, Roz and April, who will be going through the slides with you today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. If you could all just keep your cameras and microphones off unless speaking, that would be greatly appreciated so we don't get any background noise. And just to make you aware, this is being recorded and will be made available on Friday and will be advertised in the bulletin alongside today's slides. There are a number of opportunities to raise questions for today's speakers, and we'll be doing that via Slido, which I'll be bringing on to the next slide. So if you just scan that QR code, that will bring up the Q&A for you. Alternatively, you can just type in that number into slido.com. And then the last option, if you have the desktop app of Microsoft Teams, you should see an S at the top of the screen. And if you click that, that should open up a panel where you can ask questions throughout. I'll just leave that up there just for a moment or so just people can get that before we kick off today. What I will do as well is I'll drop that into the chat so it's there. And then I'm just going to hand over to April to go through the agenda for today, and then we can begin. And I'll just pop that into the chat for you now. Thanks, April.
Thanks, Millie. Hi, good morning all. So just a quick overview of the agenda. So first up, we'll be covering a bit of an overview around the data specification, how to access, how to navigate certain functions. Then Roz will take us through some non-REC owned data and message items. We'll then stop for a short Q&A just with regards to those two previous items, and then we will move on to an update from Neil around the new SQL version access and the guidance documentation there. Again, I think then we stop for a brief Q&A, and then the final section is going through some upcoming data specification changes, which we'll all be covering off, and then a final stop for any questions and a review of any feedback. I think if everybody's happy, we can move through into the first one. Thanks, Millie, and into the next slide. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so in this section, we're going to be providing an overview of the data specification. We're going to be looking at its functions to allow you as users to self-serve, gain all the necessary access to the data and the information that you need. So specifically, we're going to be touching on how to navigate and access the data specification via the EMAR Digital Navigator. We're going to be looking at the information and the data that's available within the data spec dashboards. And then finally, how to use the detailed search functions to obtain information on market messages, data items, and scenario variants. So to start with, what is the data specification? So pretty much as it says there on the slide, the REC Data Specification describes the data items and market messages that are used by industry parties to send and receive information. So it's important to note that this includes not just REC-owned items, but is also covering messages and data items which are owned and governed under different areas, so the BSC, TCUSA, and SEC, for instance. So that's really useful to know that it houses all of that information. Okay, so moving on then to how to access the data spec. So access can be achieved by navigating to the REC portal homepage. So as the small icon there shows you. On the dashboard on the left-hand panel, choosing the last option of EMAR Digital REC and Data Specification. So selecting this will automatically redirect you through to the Energy Market Architecture repository, the EMAR. If you're already signed in and pre-registered as a user in the REC portal, this is automatically going to redirect you. You won't be asked to recomplete any sign-in unless, of course, your session has timed out, and in which case it will prompt you to do that again. Important to note here that you don't have to have a pre-registered account to access any of this information or to get through to this dashboard. You can do that through the public platform on a guest access. You're then going to be presented with two options, again, as shown on the screen there. So you have the left-hand button, and that will direct you through to the Digital Navigator. So this houses an updated but a simplified user dashboard, and that will navigate and access REC code schedules and the data specification, detailed search and dashboard functions. The right-hand button that you can see there is the IBM Jazz, and this is essentially the old style platform, but it does provide a more detailed view of the code schedules, the data specification, and it also provides the market scenario business process maps, release schedules, and some reports. Important to note, unlike the digital navigator, that this does require having a registered REC portal account, and that's to ensure that access is provided to the right level of information, certainly with regards to reporting and so on and so forth. If we can move through to the next slide, please, Millie. Okay, so upon selecting the digital navigator option, the top image that you see on your screen here is then the new home page that will be displayed. So you get two rows there, as we can see. You get the code schedule and data specification, which are two separate buttons, and then just below that you've got dashboard and detailed search. So depending on the options that you have selected, the darker green will be identified. So you can see here that we've got data specification and dashboard as the chosen option. So just to give a quick overview of what's housed in the code schedule. So that includes all REC code schedules, latest, previous versions as well. You can access it very much by a click of a button. You can read it within the user interface, or you can choose to download that, and that will come through in Microsoft Word format. But obviously we're here to look at the data specifications. So once you go onto this dashboard, you'll then see a number of options, and it will include 6 sections, as we've noted on the slide. So you'll get the data specification catalogs, and that contains all the full REC data spec in HTML in access formats. It also has the standard definitions document and some other catalogs available. We have the data access matrices section, and that includes both gas, electricity. We have the data specification documents section, and this houses multiple documents which outline the rules, the information related to the data specification build. So these will be things like technical specifications and so on and so forth. We then have the meter product data tables, and that contains the latest gas meter product tables and the relevant response codes. We have guidance documents, and that contains legacy documents such as DTC annexes. And then we have the data specification pre-release information. So that's housing everything that's upcoming with regards to the versions of the data spec. You can move forward. Thank you. So this is just a quick visual item of those sections that we've just covered off, and just some helpful tips to know. So when you're in this section, depending on which of the options and which of the items that you select, you're going to have one of 3 things that are going to occur that are going to allow you to view these. So some items are downloadable files only. So when you select them, they'll automatically be downloaded into your browser history. From there, you can access them, you can save them and open them, etc. A second option is that you'll be automatically redirected to another page that exists within the email that's going to provide you with all the relevant information. In most cases, it's a document or an image that's underpinned there, so it will automatically open within the same browser, and you can download, you can print it in a non-editable format there. Just a quick tip that when opening these documents, they will open in the same browser window. So if you know that you have multiple items or you want to navigate back to the dashboard, you can do that by selecting the back button. But often we recommend using the right hand tab or mouse key within your laptop to open the link in a new browser, and then you've got the ability to go to and forth between them. We can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at here now is the detailed search function. So looking back on the previous homepage that we saw, we had the option to look at dashboards or to do the detailed search function. So we were looking previously at dashboards. This view now provides us what we're going to see if we were to select the detailed search function. So the first image that you get on your screen in the white, where you can see data specification search, you can see the options for market message, scenario variant, and data items. This is the home page essentially that pops up. And again, much like we saw before, the chosen darker green option is what your chosen selection is. Depending on which one you have chosen, you'll be provided with a full list of those associated either market message, scenario variants, or data items. And they cover everything as we suggested before, so the REC items and all the other aspects that were previously or are governed elsewhere. So as we say, you can search via these items, but you can also further refine your results. So you have a text search item, so you can either filter by your source or your target masters. So if you know who your to and from recipients needs to be, or if you have a specific term or a keyword that you're looking for, you can use the search function, which should help refine that search further for you. The search function allows for EMAR IDs, it allows for legacy IDs, and names and partial search criteria will also be returned. So it really is down to you on how much information that you have available. So what we're going to do is take a walk through of each of these relevant items, starting off with market messages. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Okay, so here we have just an example of the market message page that's displayed. So we've just chosen a pretty random one on here. So we happen to just be looking at market message 00096, which is the key transactions details message and flow. So from this page, is pretty much what you can see here is market messages, which is the term used under the REC to define and describe the structured communication sent between two market participants in the form of a specified message, or a flow in this case. So if you select this on the detailed search homepage, you, as previously mentioned, will see a list of full market messages. In this particular one, we've just picked up the key transaction details. So the details that you'll be provided on this screen. So in the first table here, we can see then that you get the full name of the market message, you get its ID, and it will indicate furthermore the information around local catalogue reference. So in this case, it's the D0188 flow. It will give you a description of the flow, its latest version number as appropriate, and any notes that parties should be aware of or apply when building the message for issuing, and likewise the validation that needs to be applied when the flow is received. The following table then lists all of the data items which are included within the message structure. So this will include the data item reference, its local catalogue reference, and the name of the data item. And the final table will then list the scenario variants for the message, which are the permissible source target options for parties who are able to send or receive the message. So in this particular example, we only see one scenario variant identified, but we can see its name, the source, the sending party, and the target, the receiving party. And all of the information on the market messages can be downloaded from this page as well. So something we can't see specifically here, but is in the top left-hand corner of the screen, you get a download image. If you click that and select it, it will then download again into your browser, so you can then pick that up. Furthermore, from this page, we can then navigate through to specific items. So much like we discussed, you can use the home page to either get to the areas that you want to, or you can navigate through market messages. So in this particular example, we're going to click on the DI5003, which is the MPAN core data item, and that takes us then through to the page that we're seeing on the screen now. So as I mentioned, you can obviously navigate through market messages to get to these particular aspects, or you can come back and you will be shown exactly the same screen if you've navigated here via the home page. So in this page, we're shown a number of items. This includes the name and the description of the data item, but also any formatting rules that need to be adhered to, things like the logical, the physical length, data types and formats. In addition, you can identify who the data item owner is, in this case, RECO. But as we mentioned earlier, this could be a BSC, DECUSA or SEC item. Plus, any applicable notes are included here that need to be advised or adhered to. The bottom table provides a full overview of the associated market messages where the data item is included. Obviously, MPAN core is a fairly highly used electricity item and therefore is included in a number of market messages. We're only including a snapshot on this screen so that you can just see that for a reference. In addition, something that you can't see on the screen but is also available within this page is if a data item has multiple enumerations, then this information can be sourced and identified within this page. So looking at a particular different example that might have number of enumerations, if there was a priority services register categorization for that data item, that would list out the enumeration relevant and then the description for those. So again, all helping you build up your knowledge of these flows in these areas. Okay, and likewise, as we said, you can download all the information that's related to data item on the page. So the last area then that we're going to cover, and using the same examples that we've carried through, we're going to look at scenario variants. And much like data items, the scenario variants page as shown on the screen can be navigated to directly from market messages, as this is another table that's included, or you can access this from the detailed search page via the normal navigation as we mentioned previously. So in this particular example, we only have one permitted scenario variant instance. However, in other market messages, several instances may be permissible based upon the source and the target parties. So important information around that. They will all have separate IDs that you'll be able to access and see the source and the target parties too, which should hopefully help refine that search further for you. And you can see these on the screen as demonstrated in the blue boxes in the direction of the flow. The entire message, sorry, can we just move back to the previous? Thank you. So other information that can be found on this page, which is really useful for building your flows, is all of the message flow structure. So this is broken down by the group, data items, and the rules, and it also includes the message owner in the top screen. But the flow structure table includes all of the relevant information which enables messages to be built within your systems and then sent to and received by other parties. So this will include things such as the grouping IDs, any description, ranges of modality and cardinality, levels, and data item conditionality. So confirming there whether items are mandatory, optional, or conditional. And there is also obviously a rule reference to any rules that must be applied in certain conditions. So for this particular example that we can see on the screen, if we've got the data item for reading date and time, the time value must be as stated on the screen there on the first issue of the message for a new meter. If we can move on to the next one, please. Okay, so appreciate what we've covered there is quite a lot of detail and a lot of me speaking over some screenshots. So what we've looked to do is create a revised and a new data specification guidance document. So that will be released imminently on the REC portal, so it'll be available as a portal wiki page. So it'll include a knowledge article and covers much of the information that I've just spoken about there, but it also has inclusion of a downloadable guidance document, which does go into some level around FAQs, previously asked questions that have come up. So we will be looking to review and improve this guidance to ensure that you're empowered and enabled to conduct all of your activities within the data specification. And again, if there are any if you'd like to be added to a distribution list, so when our pre-release has been published, or if you have any queries in future, or you have any questions regarding the data specification themselves, if you could direct those through to the inquiries at REC Manager or the help desk, that would be great, and we'll be happy to keep a review on things. But I think that brings us to the end of our first section, so I will hand across to Roz.
So in this next section, I'm going to talk about non-REC owned data items. So if we move into the next slide. The REC data specification contains data items and market messages, not just for the retail energy code, but also other industry codes, namely the balancing settlement code, the DCUSA, the SEC, and the UNC. So if you want to make a change to a data item or a market message, the first thing you need to do is check who the owner is. In the example on screen, we have a screenshot from the data specification showing a data item which is owned by the balancing and settlement code. So any change you'd like to make to this item, you wouldn't come to ourselves at the code manager, you'd go to the balancing and settlement code. If we move on to the next screen, there are a number of different scenarios that you might come across when making changes to the data specification. Firstly, you might have a change that impacts non-REC owned data items and market messages, like in the example in the previous slide, which was owned by the BSC. In that case, you would go directly to the code manager that is named as the owner, and they will ensure approval under the governance process set out within that code, and then tell ourselves at the REC code manager, and we will then implement that change within the REC data specification. Another scenario is that there might be a non-REC owned data specification change that has a consequential impact on the REC. So this could be to a REC defined system, such as the inquiry services, or it could be to the REC legal text, or it could be to REC owned elements of the data specification. As for the first scenario, The non-REC owned data specification change should be progressed through the owner. And if you have a known or even suspected REC impact, contact us via the inquiries mailbox, and we'll then progress a change if needed to the REC. And where there are code changes in multiple codes that are linked to each other, the cross-code steering group, which is a group made up of all of the code managers, will ensure that the changes are progressed in collaboration with each other. And finally, it might be that you only want to change REC-owned items, in which case come directly to ourselves at the REC Code Manager. We will do a review to check that there isn't a consequential impact on the other codes, as will the other codes if you raise through them. And as ever, if you need any support or guidance, or if you're not sure what to do, the inquiries mailbox and the service desk team there are available to provide help and support. And then on our next slide, I'm going to talk about some principles we're looking to introduce. So based on feedback we've been receiving from users of the data specification, we've been discussing with the other codes that own data items some principles, and these are displayed on screen. And the aim is to ensure that no matter which code approves a change to the data specification, there is consistency in approach. So that as data specification users, you have an idea of what to expect. These are principles, so there's no intention that they'd be built into the codes and become mandatory, but they'd rather steer the decisions made and the actions taken by the various code managers to give consistency for parties. So you'd know that you'd have at least 3 months between the pre-release for a change being published and the code change going live. So that's the implementation window there between that period. These principles, they're not the final versions. We are collecting feedback and we'll be refining them accordingly. One area that I've had feedback on is making it clearer that it's not always going to be possible to comply with them in all circumstances. For example, rather than saying no ad hoc releases, it's been suggested this should be changed to it's recommended that changes are applied in the standard releases, because there will be instances like urgent changes where it won't be possible to avoid an ad hoc release. And in our next section, we're going to do a Q&A session. So as well, any questions on the data spec, we welcome any feedback you might have on those principles. Shall pause for questions.
Thanks, Roz. So we've already just got one question in, and I don't know who it will be, Roz or April, asking this, but will both the Digital Navigator and IBM Jazz continue to exist together?
Yes, for the time being, they will. So what we have, IBM Jazz, for those who aren't aware of the history, was the original EMAR, and it has significantly more on it and more functionality than the Digital Navigator. But we were getting feedback that it was difficult to use because it is quite a complex system that has a lot on there. So at the moment, we've got the more complex IBM Jazz with additional functionality, and then the Digital Navigator alongside it with easier to view information.
That's great. Thanks, Roz. And then how will you ensure that other code managers support these principles?
So we've not been developing the principles in isolation. It's been done in discussion with those other code managers and sharing the feedback that we've had from parties who use the data spec that contributed to the drafting of those principles. So it's a collaborative effort on developing principles. And also we're looking at establishing a group that will then, using a pre-established group such as the cross-code steering group or another one to oversee the implementation of those. But like I say, they are principles, so they're not set in stone and they're not built into the codes. They're just guidance.
Thanks, Roz. Are there any other questions? And if not on Slido, did anybody want to raise anything verbally before we move on to the next section? Oh, we've got one, speak of the devil. Relating to pre-releases, would the REC ever provide sample files of amended messages? This helps suppliers a lot with testing.
This is a question we've received from a couple of parties so probably in the last year or so. It's not something we currently do, but if there were strong demand for it, it's potentially something we can consider, but it is not something we offer at present.
Thanks, Roz. I'll just keep this open just for a bit longer. Is there anything that anybody wishes to raise verbally? There is other opportunities to ask questions throughout this as well, so this won't be the last Q&A. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds before we go on to the next section. think if everyone's happy, we'll move on.
So yeah, morning everyone. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the new machine readable format that we have implemented for the June release going forward. So if we could just jump to the next slide, please. So at present, up until the June release from REC Go Live, Microsoft Access was the method for viewing and accessing the full REC Data Specification. So I guess a bit of context and a bit of background for those of you who may be new to this. We were providing a full REC database which contains all of the information held within the data specification. And then on request of industry, we have been providing the legacy DTC format access database. So we have those two access databases. For the avoidance of doubt, we are not getting rid of the DTC format access database when we are talking about the access that we're replacing with a SQL Server database here. So maybe to head up any questions, that one is going to remain for the time being. So yeah, the February release was the final release of the full REC database in access format. We've now introduced a SQL readable backpack file for 3.5 and beyond. We did ask some questions. We did a bit of a mini consultation with some stakeholders earlier in the year, questioning if they got any value out of the full REC database being in access format. And the feedback we got was that it was either not used or was just not information that they required. We actually hold all of the information internally in SQL anyway, in a backpack format. So it makes our lives easier, and it's actually a better solution overall. So moving on to that, then why are we changing? It's a more robust database. Access is very old format. We do get some feedback that the parties wish we didn't use Access, which is sort of why we've started moving in this direction. It can be used on Windows and Mac. You don't need to have the Access suite installed, which some users may not have access to. Particularly those that work on cloud applications, Google Office and things like that. It's secure and future-proof, much better at handling data than Access, and it's easier to manage the integration between different applications. So you can interrogate the backpack file via your choice of SQL application. And then there's just a little screenshot on the right-hand side there to show where it's held on the digital navigator. Not sure if we have a zoom in of that on another slide, but it's just at the bottom there, SQL database backpack v3.5. And there you can see we're also providing the HTML file and then the DTC format of the access. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Alongside providing the database itself, we've also produced a bit of a guidance document on how you can download and install Microsoft SQL Server. It's very straightforward. One of the team created it, and I followed it, so I can vouch that it's usable, even for a Luddite like me. So yeah, that's on the guidance documents section of the digital navigator as well. And if you just click on it, it should download for you. And then, as mentioned before, the actual database is a backpack file, and that's under the pre-release information at the moment. We're working on the final versions of the pre-release, given the approvals that are required for a couple of changes at the end of the month. So that will be updated on the 30th of May, just to contain all of the changes that are required for the June release. So watch that space, because that'll be updated at the end of the month. The guidance document also lets you know how you install, alongside installing SQL Server, it lets you know how you load the database into the program as well. And then we'll just move on to the next slide. And then this is just a very, very high level overview of how you can interrogate the data within whichever SQL application you use. So primarily it's aimed at technical members of your team, although I'd encourage anyone who looks at or uses the market messages on a daily basis to try and get involved and take a look at this, because it's a much easier way of checking some of the data points within the database without scrolling through EMAR or the digital navigator if you're not 100% sure on what you're looking for. Members of your organization who want to conduct complex queries against the data, and that can be used or that can be undertaken with the SQL syntax. So the images on the right-hand side there, we can just see that we're using the database RECO EMAR, and this is 3.3, and then select, and the star is everything, and then from, and then data access type is the name of the table that you're selecting from. And then underneath that, you can see we've selected and it's returned all of the different data access type identifiers, their descriptions, or their names, and then any descriptions which are null at the moment, which means there's no information there. And then a slightly more complex one, we're selecting from the table message scenario variant collection, and then we've added a condition, and we only want to see where the identifier is equal to SV 107. And then in the table below, you can see the results returned for that. And that's essentially where the modality and the cardinality for SV 107 is set. So those are just two very high level examples of how you can interrogate the data.
Oh.
Okay, and if we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay.
I think that was everything. Is that okay, Neil?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We would like to see more consultation for all industry parties prior to removing access and not selective groups. Please, can this be considered going forward? I guess that's more of a statement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've mentioned on a number of occasions, particularly the DTC access format, that we wouldn't be removing that before sort of detailed, lengthy consultation process. Obviously, recognise the impacts that it would have on industry, not only on parties like Electrolink using it for the DTN, but also third-party service providers and suppliers or parties that use that database in-house as well. So yeah, that's absolutely something we would look to do and get that comms out as far as possible, far and wide. I did see you had your hand up, Lisa. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, sorry, I don't, it's just finding out about these things. We've obviously got a lot to track across the industry, and I kind of read the email about this webinar and in a bit of a panic, like, oh my God, what's happening? So, and I appreciate your assurance at the start of the presentation, but it's just how these things are consulted on. It feels like they're kind of done behind closed doors, and then we're kind of informed afterwards. So I think it just, particularly on this element, if we could see a wider audience, that'd be really appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ros, I don't know if you could drop some details maybe in the chat about the distribution list, and we can get people added to that, because that would be
that'd be helpful.
One of the lists that we definitely include.
Yes, we have a dedicated distribution list for data specification items, where we notify about things like workshops, pre-releases and similar. So if you email the inquiries mailbox, I think we've got a slide with that address on it, you can asked to be added to the distribution list, and then you will receive notification. What we tend to do is everything goes into the bulletin as well, the REC bulletin. So we tend to say, just to flag to you, this information's gone out in the REC bulletin, just in case you haven't seen it in the bulletin. So we do try and cover both bases.
Yeah, it's just we just, you know, there's just a lot of communication, so it's just making sure that we pick it up. But I appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Yep. Anyone who'd like to, if you join the REC data specification distribution list, you'll get a notification of every time anything's gone out that might be of interest to you through other routes as well, such as the bulletin.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Neil's just popped that into the chat.
And then I guess this one's for you as well, Ros, and linking to those lists, contract managers on that distribution list, or is that voluntary?
It's a voluntary distribution list. So we've sent out quite a few emails and bulletins when it was set up, trying to get people to put their names forward to it. And at events like this, we do flag it, but it's not, we haven't automatically added anyone. So it doesn't have any contract managers unless they've come to us and said they'd like to be added. But we do notifications through the bulletin as well. So Millie, I believe contract managers are on the distribution list for the bulletin.
Yes. Thanks, Ros. Are there any other questions for Ros or Neil? And if anybody wishes to raise anything verbally, please just raise your hand. I'll give it a few more seconds. But as mentioned, there is another Q&A section as well after the next section. So there'll be ample opportunities to ask these questions. So if no one has any further questions, are we happy to move on? Yep.
Thanks, Lily. So one of the things that we wanted to do as part of this workshop is give some visibility of upcoming future changes within the REC Data Specification. So we've got three main ones that we'd like to cover off. This slide here just gives a quick overview, and what we'll be doing is jumping into each of them in a bit more detail and covering those off. So happy to move into the next slide, please. So the first one that we're going to look at is R0113. So this is a recently raised change proposal, and it's data specification, housekeeping and clarifications, as the name of it. So the purpose of this change proposal is to really look to remove any gaps or ambiguity, especially for new entrants or parties looking to build their systems under the REC. And the CP will ultimately looks to align and, as I say, remove gaps between any of the REC data specification and the pre-REC legacy documents. So just at a very high level, the information that this includes is updates to the REC standards definition document, again, trying to create alignment or remove any ambiguity. But essentially what it's doing is looking to provide clarifications on data type formats for units of measurement, for appropriate data items, but also to look to further define and signpost where information can be sought out which may not be contained within a REC product. So give that full end-to-end for its users to make sure that everything's nice and clear. Furthermore, what it's looking to do is to make relevant updates to market messages or appropriate scenario variants, and that should look really to remove references which are no longer relevant or valid, but also where appropriate, update references which may have typos and could potentially cause some further confusion. So what we're looking to do, as I say, this CP has very recently been raised, but the initial next steps on taking it forward to identify its change pathway is to look to hold a workshop with industry participants as soon as possible. And really what we're looking to do here is ensure that if there are any further changes that need to be included within this CP, but also to make sure that the changes that are included are not going to potentially impact any parties that are new and are looking to build their systems around the REC, as opposed to those which are built under previous legacy system rules. So we will be sending out some comms on that event shortly, and would really encourage parties to attend and to help identify if there are any further inclusions that we can add here or potential impacts that we need to be made aware of. So I think we can move that one through into the next one, and I can pass back over to Neil, please.
Yeah, back to me to talk a little bit about some of the changes that we're making to the data specification as a result of the half-hourly programme. So if we could just jump forward, please. So as I touched on earlier, the REC Data Spec brings together quite a few local catalogues, is how we're naming them. They have various owners, and they range from the REC, BSC, DCUSA, SEC as well. And they cover message interactions across the whole dual fuel industry, gas and electricity, including CSS, RGMA, the legacy DTC, and then settlement arrangements under the VSC. We, as the TDA, have been requested to add all of the DIP interface messages, as well as the reporting catalog to the REC Data Specification, in order to provide sort of one-stop shop for all of the industry messages. And also a bit of removing duplication and any costly development of standalone DIP or a standalone DIP catalog. The work we've done on this over the last couple of months is breaking down and translating the interfaces into our current model, as well as making some structural updates to the model itself, which we'll go through in the coming slides. We are working with the program on this. We've raised a few design issues where our analysis of the data has flagged up some issues, some as minor as just spelling mistakes, and some more fundamental about the actual content of the interfaces. We're going through that process at the moment. Some of those design issues have been added to the program design issue log, and some we're still working on. And then a note to say we're working on an assumption that the business validation rules that govern the use of those DIP flows are going to be hosted in separate documents, and where those documents are going to be hosted is yet to be defined. So if we could just go forward, please. So this slide is just looking at the high level sort of metadata for the market messages. That snip on the top left is taken from the view that you'll see if you look in DES 138, which is the interface catalog. And then the bottom right snip is how we're proposing to display that in the data specification. If you were to compare that bottom right snip to the current catalog, you'll see that there's two fields added on the end there. So that's DIP delivery pattern and a security category. We did this just to make sure that the market message data is clear and consistent. We raised the point around the version numbers. So the version numbers will, in the DIP interfaces, will follow the REC version numbering. So you can see we've got it there as a 001 format. And in the program specification, they had that as a 0.0. Whatever. Then moving on, the from and to parties, the scenario variants will be split out on the next slide. And then the notes field is just shown at the bottom. So the routing options in the REC data specification, we call those scenario variants. We've split the routing of the DIP interfaces into these scenario variant format. And this is something that still remains to be confirmed, but we've split them so that each scenario variant is unique to the business process. So we've got a metering service de-appointment, as well as any combination of primary and secondary routing. So hopefully the blue, sort of red, green, and purple helps to show the different processes and then the different combinations of those primary and secondary routings. And then the table at the top just shows how they're displayed in the interface catalog. And then if we could go forward, please. So hopefully this is very familiar. and some of it is almost identical to the current structure that we have within the data specification. So this is just a representation of that previous message. And then if we go from the top right clockwise, you can see that we've populated some value rules just to help with the population. We've got the data item names in there. It's still yet to be decided whether we populate the actual data item names or as DIP messages are sent with or sent in a JSON format. If we put the JSON name there, that's a question that we're going to be asking when this is consulted on in August this year, whether parties want sort of a plain English data item name or if they want the JSON name. Moving on round, then we've got the data item optionality and then any obfuscation in there. Conditional population rules. So in this one, the B10 group or block, as they're known in the half-hourly world, is mandatory if the de-appointment reason code isn't deregistration. And then moving up on the left-hand side, we've got the cardinality and the range, which is displayed as current, the group or block IDs, and then the group names. And then the title at the top will obviously depend on which scenario variant is being referenced in the table below. So if we could just jump forward then. And then this is how we're proposing to hold the data item information. So again, very familiar to the current format. Starting on the left then is the sort of overarching REC catalog reference. Because we've got multiple local catalogs within the data specification, we need to have a global ID. So this will just be assigned the same as all the other global REC items. The item description or definition, just to say what the item is for. The legacy reference. At this point, this slide is actually a little out of date potentially. So we've been conducting an exercise alongside RECO and with members of the code drafting working group to identify items which the program is proposing new items, and we've identified items which already exist within the DTC catalog that have an identical structure. So where that is the case, you will see a market-wide reference such as DI999, and then you'll see a slash and then the J reference which that item is identical to. So that should hopefully help with items that are already defined within party systems, so they don't have to create duplicate items with a different reference. Pretty standard data item owner. This is just populated with the program at the moment, because it's yet to be confirmed who those owners are. And then the normal attributes of logical length, decimal length, physical length, and then the data type formats. If there were any enumerations for an item, they would appear in the table below, but event code is just a code, so there's no available enumerations or valid set information for that. And then the table below will detail all of the different messages that said data item appears in, and we've just populated it once just for the purposes of this example. But if event code is present in every single DIP interface, then they'll be listed out in that table there. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And that was me. So I'll pass you over to Ros. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. And I'm going to talk about our future roadmap change. So if we just move to the next slide. So we've raised R0113 to remove any ambiguity, particularly for new entrants, so that when anyone entering the market builds their systems, they're going to do so in a way that aligns with what others who use the pre-REC data specifications have built. We've also got a list of other more minor issues that will be progressing at a future point in time under what we're calling the data specification roadmap change. And we're going to wait until we've got baselined text for 113 and the MHHS changes, and then start applying these changes. And it's things like adding in missing data item descriptions, ensuring that descriptions are not ambiguous, correcting typos, spelling errors, the use of characters that shouldn't be in there, an example on the slide there, and updating out of date and incorrect references. It's intended that these changes will be housekeeping only, so there'll be no impact on party systems. And if you're aware of anything in the data specification that doesn't quite look right, please do flag it to us and we can add it to our list for this cleanup CP. So next slide, please, Millie. Any got questions already?
Perfect. Okay. Can we export flow structures from the data specification catalogue?
Yes, you can. Oh, Neil, sorry, I'll let Neil take that one.
I was going to say yes as well. So the ones on EMAR can be downloaded in Word documents or PDFs, but with the introduction of the SQL database, whilst you can't export them, you can query them and build them yourself within whichever SQL application you use. So that was an advantage that we identified over the REC specification being held within Access. You can flexibly design your own queries to build the flow structures.
Thank you. And Lisa gave us a thumbs up, so I think that answers the question. And then do we know if the programme will also host the ifs on a platform?
I don't know for sure if they will host them in a specific format. At the moment, they're held for development purposes. They're held in a Swagger, which is, as I understand it, a bit of a dump of all of the JSON information. So if you have access to the collaboration base for the program, you should be able to find your way to the Swagger that hosts all of the information in JSON format. Going forward, I'm not sure how and where the program will be hosting those documents. So yeah, I can't say for sure on that one, I'm afraid. It'd be a question for the program themselves.
Thank you. And how do you identify the changes in HTML pre-release?
I suppose there's no straightforward way, as in they're not redlined. So the HTML pre-release is a clean version of everything that will be contained in the relevant release that it is for. The changes can be identified via the red line text that is included on the change proposal page for the REC portal. So that's probably the quickest and the easiest way. So if you wanted to see the changes that R11 and R90 are making, we'd probably recommend you download the redlined legal text from the portal. But if you just want to see what the June release is going to look like, then the HTML will show you a clean version of that.
Just to add to Neil's point there, oh, sorry. We have had feedback around the legal text from the various different codes. So at the moment, there's no set structure for those individual codes in terms of how they publish their legal text. So it can look very different from code to code. So another thing we're discussing with the other codes that own data items is creating a specific structure that the legal text must be in. So for example, downloading it from the EMAR and applying your redlining to that download, or filling in a form for new flows, so that no matter which code the change comes from, you're able to view text in a way that's familiar across the codes.
Thanks, Ros. Jackie, your hand is up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to type it in, but it's too complicated. Yes, so one of my issues is to be able to get sight of other code changes within the data specification. So where another code has changed something. it's to see that structure within the data specification early enough to effect changes for our systems. And one of my examples would be where there was a BSC change where they, I think, created a new market message, and then there was a subsequent change to that market message, but there was no sight of that before the market message had gone live in a release. So there was a subsequent change made to that market message, and there was no visibility of the original one within the data specification. If that makes sense.
So the original baselining hadn't been used to create the next one?
I think the original baseline within the BSE code had been used, but from a data specification, the new market message was not visible. So when the change came through to make amendments to that, again, it wasn't visible within the data specification. And obviously the red line version created by the BSE code body is not necessarily in the same format structure as what we see within the data specification in the EMAR.
Oh yeah, so that we've had similar feedback as that before, so that's why we're trying to introduce a consistent format for all the changes, so that no matter which code you look at, it's in the same structure for the legal text. I'm also talking to the other codes about introducing a tracker that would have, it'd be a spreadsheet that had all the in progress changes to the data specification and their current status, so that no matter which route the change was coming through, you could go to a single place on the EMAR and view that list. And it's still in discussion about whether we'll be able to collect that information from the other codes and how it would be maintained. But my hope is in the future, you'll be able to go to the EMAR and look at a page, and that will list every single thing that's in progress across all the codes, so you know what to expect.
But for example, where another code has approved a change, so they've approved it in the February, it's going to be released in the November, then it would be helpful to have those changes reflected within the EMAR specification, so you know that they are going to be released in the November. It's that sort of visibility to have that within the EMAR itself, so that as soon as a code is, as soon as the change has been approved, then that then is reflected within the EMAR, you know, a pre-release version of the EMAR.
So as you're saying, because what we're discussing is principles where we'd say there'd be a minimum of 3 months between the pre-release being published and go live. You'd like to see more of a staggered pre-release that has changes added to it as they're approved.
Yeah, generally as an industry, I mean, under the MRA, we used to have a minimum of 6 months for sight of those changes, and I appreciate that whilst you know from the code body itself that raised the change, you would be aware of something. It would be more helpful to have it as as you say, a one-stop shop. You know, within the MRA, we used to have you know, the pre-releases, which used to show the upcoming changes that had been approved. We don't seem to have that same visibility at the moment.
I'll take that on board and look at the principles. We have had pushback from at least one other code that they're concerned that the getting approval at least 4 months before implementation might not be ideal from their perspective. So we've gone for a minimum, but that doesn't mean that we can't, for individual changes, and REC ones say it's going to be 6 months. You don't have to go with the principles just setting out the bare minimum, so it's giving that assurance. But we'll take that feedback and look at what else we can do.
Yeah, I would just wonder what's changed between, you know, the end of MRA and the start of faster switching to say that the 6 months is an issue for code bodies, but that's obviously another question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Is there any other questions, either through Slido or verbally, that anybody wishes to raise? As always, as mentioned throughout the session, if you do have any questions following this, please just do drop a line to the service desk team, and I'm sure you'll get a response that way as well. But I'll just give it a few more seconds before we move on. I mean, that is actually the end of the session, and it will just be a quick survey if no one else has anything. Yep, so sorry, yeah, so that is kind of the end of today's session. So thank you for attending. And as always, with these sessions, we do really value your feedback. So this is just based on how useful you found the session. So it shouldn't take you too long. And if you had any comments or feedback as well, there is an open text field there that you can populate. And this does help us to improve future sessions. For you guys. So that is everything from today. As mentioned, the recording and the slides will be made available on in the bulletin on Friday, and the guidance document and wiki article that April was referring to should also be made available as well, and we'll populate that and put that in for the bulletin. So yeah, that concludes today's session. Thank you for attending, and yeah, any questions, please just do drop the service desk a line. Thank you.